Good evening, Liberation Hour. This is your host, Comrade Felicity, coming at you pre-recorded. Haha, yes. Currently, I am at the second session of Labor Talks on imperialism. U.S. imperialism, Chinese imperialism. What is imperialism exactly? Well, our good friend Lenin actually had a really good theory on this, and so we're going to be talking about it at Channing Murray today at this time, exactly at 7 p.m. or actually 6 p.m. So if you are interested in going to the next session, that will be in November, date coming soon. And in this pre-recording, I will be sharing with you my discussion with Comrade Camilo on Enver Hoxha. Who was he? What were his broad strokes policies? And was he actually a dictator? Hint, the answer is no. He was an anti-revisionist, Marxist-Leninist, and someone very important to the communist movement in Albania. So listen in, grab a snack, and I'm super excited to play this for you guys. Have a lovely time, and I will not see you next week live, but the week after. Have a lovely time. Thank you, comrades. WRFU is an open forum for the Havana-Champaign online community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU UCIMC. All right, awesome. So it's really great to have you here today. If you could give yourself an introduction and we'll go ahead and get started.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. So my name is Camilo Lasso. I'm the national chair of the American Party of Labor and have been so since about 2016. Have been a communist activist since my late teen years. So going back to the uh, early 80s. So I've been around for a long time. Know a lot of people, seen a lot of stuff. Um, can tell you where the bodies are buried. Oh, shouldn't have said that. But I've been around for forever. But yeah, so that's me. I've had also a lifelong interest in politics and history, and that's me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think so. Today we're here to talk about Enver Hoxha. He was the communist leader of Albania until from I believe 1945 to 1980. Correct those dates if I'm wrong. But he was very much an anti-revisionist. You know, at the American Party of Labor, we do uphold Hoxha. He is definitely a staple, I would say, of our ideology. And I think that if you could go in a little bit why we believe that first, I think it would be good to kind of establish the ideology and what he actually believed versus what the CIA says he believed. Because
Oh,
there's a lot of propaganda out there.
oh, there's a lot out there. Um, okay, where to begin, really? So why do we uphold Hoja? Well, maybe the best way to approach that is how we don't uphold Hoja. And what I mean by that is this. So sometimes we'll hear from people. So why do you uphold Hoja? He didn't make any contributions to Marxism-Leninism. In fact, he himself said that he did not contribute to Marxism-Leninism, to the further development of Marxism-Leninism. You know, there is no Hojaist stage of development. Where there is one for Mao, let's say, people will often say. And our response is, well, yeah, that's the point. You're missing the forest for the trees here. Yeah, we uphold Hoxha not because he is the fifth head of Marxism-Leninism, although I have a story for you about that. But we uphold Hoxha because he defended Marxism-Leninism. He defended Marxism-Leninism in the age of revisionism and social imperialism. He defended and upheld the principles of Marxism-Leninism when it was under assault by Khrushchev, by the policies of peaceful coexistence, by what he felt and we felt were capitulations to U.S. imperialism on the part of the now revisionist Soviet Union. He upheld and defended Marxism-Leninism. So that's why we uphold him. And we don't say that he was the next stage of Marxism-Leninism. Far from that. As a matter of fact, this is the story. Supposedly, there was an Albanian party conference sometime in the mid '70s or later, but it was definitely after Mao died, so post 75, 76. And according to the tale, at one point, um, there were guest delegations from all over the world, as there usually are at these events. And someone from the Australian delegation stood up and praised Enver Hoxha to the skies and said that Comrade Enver is the fifth classic of Marxism-Leninism.
The fifth classic, huh?
Yeah. Oh, that did not go over well.
I bet it
Uh,
didn't.
no, I think provocateur was among the nicer things that Enver called his face. Those are the nicer things, or things that I could say on the public airways here. Yeah, and Hoxha always rejected any attempt to sort of glorify him. That's not what he was about. That's not what Albania was about, and that's not what the anti-revisionist movement is about. It's about preserving and maintaining the revolutionary essence of Marxism-Leninism, not creating new pantheons. So, yeah, that's why we uphold him. That's how we don't uphold him. We uphold him as an exemplary Marxist-Leninist, as a great revolutionary. Did he make mistakes? Of course he did. He's a human being. We all make mistakes. He wasn't a god. Um, but he preserved and defended that core revolutionary essence and inspired millions. I mean, Hoxhaism, and even Hoxhaism is an incorrect phrase, right? Hoxhaism is Marxism-Leninism. As a matter of fact, I remember seeing of all places, because sometimes you find the truth in the most unexpected of places, on some kind of a right-wing website. The fascies got into a discussion of, well, what is a communist? And one of them said, well, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, unless you're a Maoist, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, whether you admit it to yourself or not, you're a Hoxhaist.
They're not wrong.
Right? Yeah.
They're not wrong.
So, they're not wrong at all. I mean, we will use, and I'll do it myself, and we as a party sometimes do it. We'll use the term Hoxhaism kind of as a signifier, as to say, okay, well, this is where we're coming from. This is the tradition that we're coming from. But it's a misnomer. There is no such thing as Hoxhaism. It's just Marxism-Leninism.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of people who say they're Stalinist, which, I mean, you
Mm.
could make more of an argument for that because Stalin did contribute a theory to, Marxism-Leninism. But I mean, I make the argument in a similar vein as you do about Hoxha, where it's like, did Stalin have, like Stalin did have contributions to the ideology for sure, but he was also just one of the most dedicated Leninists. And he would
Yeah.
have said himself, and he did say himself, that in I mean, I've been really immersed in a lot of Stalin era history. And I mean, he's quoted in saying that, like, if you compare his contributions to the ideology versus Marx and Lenin, it's like a tower for them, and him, and it's like tiny. For Stalin, it's like tiny in comparison because he's like, he's like, I uphold Marxism Leninism, but I'm myself, as Stalin, not necessarily a pillar of it, you know?
You see that same kind of modesty, even from the people who made the greatest contributions. One of my favorite quotes from Marx is someone once asked him towards the end of his life what he felt his great contributions to the socialist movement or the labor movement was. And Marx's response was, I want nothing more than to be remembered as a worthy follower of the great Robespierre.
Okay. Wow, and that's the thing. When we talk about communist leaders, there was so much misinformation out there about communist leaders being ruthless dictators who ruled with an iron fist. But then when you actually look at who these people were and what they did, it's very much projection from capitalist forces who
Yeah.
are trying to sully the good name of people like Enver Hoxha, and very much projecting what the capitalist is actually doing to the working class, which is that a same, like what they would say a communist dictator, quote unquote, is doing is actually just what the capitalist class is doing to the working class, which is ruling with an iron fist, absolutely no empathy for your fellow man, very cold. People often describe Hoxha and Stalin alike as, again, ruthless dictators, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Did you want to speak on that a little more and kind of dispel that
Yeah,
like larger
yeah.
myth?
Yeah, I mean, the person who probably was in the best position to know was Enver's wife, Nejmiye Hoxha. And sometime towards the end of her life, after Enver had already been dead for 20 years, she was interviewed, I believe, by an Albanian or an Italian, I'm not entirely sure, journalist. And the journalist asked her to address just this. Was Enver a brutal dictator? Um, and her response was, I lived with Enver for 40 years. I was at his side for 40 years.
Mm,
I knew him better than anyone. Brutal dictator, Enver was a gentle and sensitive man. And I saw with my own eyes how he suffered when he was called upon to make a hard choice and a tough decision.
mm.
There you have it.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually look at the policies in which Enver was doing, it's really not. Like that whole narrative falls apart pretty quickly, um, because like I don't know a lot about Enver Hoxha just because I would what we would call a baby leftist. But I think that there we can see there was like a lot of progress for like things like women's rights in Albania. Like I think when like we look at, for example, like this 1936 Constitution for the Soviet Union, there's a lot of, again, misinformation surrounding like, oh, well, that was only for show. But it's like, really, it wasn't. Because if you look at the daily life for people living in the Soviet Union, a lot of like most of that was very much upheld. Um, and so like what were some of the policies that Enver Hoxha pushed for that like he was actively trying to get through in order to make the working people of Albania's lives better?
There was a meme, we're the meme culture, right?
Mm,
There was a meme out there that kind of jokingly said, "Hi, my name is," like a dating. It was like almost like a dating app kind of thing.
mm.
Hi, my name is Enver. My two biggest likes are Joe Stalin and feminist.
And feminism.
And so possibly, well, okay, I would say that maybe the single most outstanding achievement of the socialist years in Albania between 1944 and 1991 was that it doubled the lifespan
Hmm.
of Albanians. That within that short period, that one generation, the average life expectancy of Albanians was doubled.
Wow.
Albania went from a feudal, patriarchic, and I'm going to come back to that one, society of basically a backwater of the Ottoman Empire to being a modern industrialized society in the span
Right.
of one generation. In the span of one generation, the achievements in healthcare, in education and literacy, in economic modernization. Albania was the first country in the world to be fully electrified, which is kind of stunning when you think about that.
Yeah, that
Now there are
is.
reasons. Now there are reasons for that. I mean, it's a small country, of course, so it's not that huge of a project as it would be in a much larger country. But it is a fact that Albania was the first fully electrified country in the world, from the capital city of Tirana to the smallest village, all electrified. But and of course, the political contributions. Which you can even quote The Simpsons at one time. There's an episode of this. There's an episode of The Simpsons where they are guests. They have as a guest an Albanian exchange student, and so Lisa Simpson is looking up Albania in the encyclopedia or whatever, in expectation of their new house guest. And she goes, and it says here, Albania's greatest export is furious political discourse. So there is that. There is that. But I would say, naturally, the doubling of the life expectancy of the citizenry is just amazing. But I would say, and going back to that meme, I love Joe Stalin and feminism. Albania made the greatest leaps in gender equality of any society up to that time.
Hmm.
And it did against a backdrop and inheriting a legacy of sort of the most brutal medievalist patriarchy.
Wow.
One of the most famous quotes from Enver is the entire party and nation should break the necks and hurl into the fire anyone who would trample on women's rights.
Wow.
And I would say it wasn't until the very late 80s, and by that time, we're seeing the unraveling of the Eastern Bloc. Um, it wasn't until the very late 80s that East Germany began to surpass Albania in the sense that East Germany um, codified gay rights into their constitution. And in present time, since then, I would say that Cuba has picked up the torch, and now Cuba sort of stands at the head of gender equality, not only in terms of women's equality, broadly speaking, but also specifically in terms of trans equality.
Yeah, they did just pass something saying that now trans people can legally just change their names on their legal documents. It doesn't, it's not like I could be misrepresenting that, but the broad strokes of what I understand about it is now trans folks have full autonomy in that, which is huge. I mean, you don't even see that in the United States. It's still a long process to be able to change your name. Um, and we're actively repealing a lot of women's rights, so it's like our when we look at these narratives about people like Hoxha being brutal dictators, I kind of have to laugh a little bit because I'm like, okay, this is like the pot calling the kettle black. Like at this point, what are we doing? Because if we like I get really frustrated with Americans calling every communist leader a dictator because there certainly were dictators. But I don't it's never in good faith. It's never in like the spirit of like trying to move society forward in like a positive way and what in a progressive way, because it's only meant to uphold like that narrative is only meant to uphold this idea that capitalism is the only way, which is just not true. I mean, the Soviet Union proved that single-handedly with the success of communist policy, and only faltered when they began doing revisionist policy.
You could even look at declassified CIA documents that have seen the light of day within recent years, and you get a totally different picture. And that's kind of interesting, because even though they lie to the public, and they do sometimes deceive themselves because they have their worldview that they have to promote, but generally speaking, they have to at least have a modicum of the truth in their own internal communications so that they have accurate intelligence
Absolutely.
and can devise accurate, effective, from their point of view, policies. And there's one document that's out there, and it can be easily accessed. I invite anyone to look it up. It's a CIA report where the agent filing the report said anyone who says something along the lines of anyone who says Stalin is a dictator has absolutely no understanding of how the Soviet system functions.
Yep.
No one individual holds total power. And although Stalin has a great deal of prestige and respect,
He absolutely
he's more
did.
like the captain. He's more like the captain of a team.
Yeah, I mean, he tried to resign like 6 times. and
Oh
they
yeah.
just wouldn't let him, and I don't like I know that like the thing about Hoja that makes him so, I guess, defined in comparison to the other budding socialist projects that were coming out of the 20th century is he was staunchly anti-revisionist. We saw that when other countries started to move in the direction of socialism, we have Tito in what is it?
Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia, you've got Mao in China. Obviously Titoism is not something we uphold here at the APL for many reasons. But like there's when it comes to anti-revisionism, the American Party of Labor specifically says we are anti-revisionist um, because of the problems that have come out of revisionist Marxist ideas. And that's part of the reason why we uphold Hoja, because he was staunchly an anti-revisionist. And he made that like he made that very clear in, his policy with other communist countries. Could you speak a little more on that about why he was so staunchly anti-revisionist and why it's important to be anti-revisionist?
Um, well, there's several ways that you could approach that. I mean, one obviously would be Hoja and the Albanian Party of Labor's, formerly Albanian Communist Party, then became the Party of Labor of Albania, um, their own specific ideology and their own specific values and worldview. Okay, so there's that. But then also, I would say, kind of due to material conditions,
Mm,
Albania, a small country, an extremely poor country, an extremely underdeveloped country, surrounded by hostile enemies who want to absorb it. Yugoslavia made no secret of the fact that they wanted to incorporate Albania as one of the republics of Yugoslavia.
mm.
The Greek regime made no secret of the fact that they wanted to that. Okay, I'll put it to you this way: the northernmost province of Greece is Epiros, and I once had a professor say to me, "Do you know what they call Albania in Greece?" I said, "No. What do they call Albania in Greece?" I thought he was going to tell me the Greek name for Albania, and he says they call it Greater Epiros.
Okay.
um, so surrounded by hostile forces, not apart, especially after the rupture with the Soviet Union in 1960-61. So not a part of the two great power blocs, not a part of NATO, not a part of um, the Warsaw Pact. Subjected, and here's part of the unknown history of Albania, subjected to constant attempts at destabilization and invasion. The CIA and British and MI6, British intelligence, tried to mount Bay of Pigs style invasions of Albania on several occasions. The most recent of which being like 1980, 81.
Hmm. Wow. That's pretty,
So
wow.
yeah, yeah, that's almost unknown to most people, but it happened.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes with the CIA.
And as a
And
matter of fact, some commentators say that the CIA's strategy, what they were going to use, how they were going to do it, to overthrow socialism in Albania, and they specifically targeted Albania. Again, it's a small country, and it was in a perfect geographic situation for an invasion. I mean, right across the Adriatic from Italy,
mm,
Greece to the south, Yugoslavia, which is hostile to the north. Um, that was the model
right.
for what they later used in Guatemala and in Cuba. It was the model for Bay of Pigs.
Huh. That's crazy. I had no idea.
Oh yeah. Um, and as a matter of fact, there's so many great stories about Albania. One of them is that during one of these attempted coups, I believe it was called Operation. Oh, they love giving these nicknames to their to their
Silly little
actions.
nicknames.
I think it was called Operation Valued Friend or something along those lines. But yeah, the typical playbook. They were
Right.
going to land a force This force was going to immediately take over the cities, spark uprisings everywhere, and before you know it, the plan was before you know it, socialism is overthrown, and whatever happens next, probably the monarchy restored, which would then align itself with the United States and Britain. Well, so the operation is undertaken, and the CIA is in radio communication with their people, with the invaders, the mercenaries, and they get a radio transmission back. Have successfully landed. Please send more weapons. Previous shipment landed in Adriatic.
Oh.
CIA responds. Excellent news. Look for further drop of weapons within whatever amount of hours. Please report on further developments.
Right.
And the Albanian, after a while, the Albanians say, several villages have been taken. Intense fighting proceeding, are beginning to advance on the capital, Tirana. More weapons are needed. Please send more weapons. And the CIA responds, drop of weapons has been scheduled for such and such a time. Please maintain radio communication regarding progress. And Albanians respond, weapons received are moving on Tirana. And silence, silence, silence. The CIA says, have not received further reports. Please report back. Silence. 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 Our CIA are very concerned about radio silence. Please verify situation. Silence. 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 Are extremely concerned regarding silence. Please verify situation. Then the Albanians respond, this is the Albanian security service. Your team was annihilated on the beach. Thanks for all the guns. Ha ha.
Oh my God. That's so funny. This is why socialism is so goated.
Someone once said, actually, he was something of a Trotskyite, but hey, we'll forgive him for this one. Alexander Helphand, also known by his pseudonym of Parvis, once said, "If there's one thing a socialist revolutionary really needs, it's a sense of humor."
Yeah, this is true. This is true. And it's funny because there are there's this the CIA, we can see that they've I was actually, and I said this on the broadcast before, but I was told by a family member that if the US stopped doing sanctions on Cuba, that maybe they would stop being communist, which I'll have to stop myself from laughing at, because that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But also there's this I think inherent American idea that our ideology will prevail over all others because they will just see how free we are and then just convert, right? This is not the case, and it hasn't been the case. If Cuba wanted to live and obviously they do have they have some questionable policies that are we don't have to get into them here, but liberalizing, if a country really wanted to liberalize and communism truly wasn't working, then they already would have. And Marxist-Leninists, being an anti-revisionist means not following revisionist ideas like Trotskyism, Titoism, Maoism, which all have revisionist elements in them, which have ultimately what was the reason why they have fallen. A lot of Maoists want to say that, well, China is still communist. They are not. I'm not gonna, argue this on the Hoxha episode. But we can see that, Hoxha had dedicated a lot of his life to organizing as well, which is a key component of really any communist ideology, but specifically in Marxism-Leninism, it's about organizing a vanguard party. And, how did communism even come to be in Albania?
As it did elsewhere
Yep.
in the wake of the Russian Revolution. Um, in the case of Albania, in the wake also of its own national liberation struggle from the Ottoman Empire,
Mm.
there were in the 1930s, 20s and 30s, several different communist study groups, attempts at organizing, but really very, very low key, very local. There was like a communist organization in Korcha. There was a communist organization in Gjirokastër, which was Hoxha's hometown. There was a communist organization in Tirana, the capital city. And for the longest time, they were operating independently.
Right.
The Comintern played a role in urging them to unite. The Yugoslavs, who had a much larger and better organized communist party, they were there also urging the different Albanian groups to unite. But the catalyst was World War II.
Ah.
The catalyst was the Italian fascist invasion of Albania, which overthrew the Albanian monarch, King Zog, and established a pro-Italian fascist puppet state
I
in
see.
Albania. And that's when, under that pressure, that need to get their act together, that the various Albanian communist groups held a unity conference, formed the Communist Party of Albania, and elected Enver Hoxha as their first general secretary.
Hmm.
And Hoxha himself had a long history of underground organizing in Albania. He had studied abroad and like I said, there's so many Hoxha stories I could tell you, but he'd studied
Right.
abroad in France and returned to Albania and taught French language and literature at what we would call the equivalent of a prep school or maybe junior college. There was no full-fledged university in
Right.
Albania at the time, but so teaching French and literature, and also organizing the first communist cells in his hometown in Gjirokastër, under the guise of a tobacco shop.
Huh.
So, as far as the public could see, this was just a tobacco shop. So you would get your pipe tobacco, your cigarettes, it's Ottoman, your hookahs there. Um, uh, but then the back room, that was the headquarters of the communist movement.
I see.
And Hoxha and there were factions. Hoxha kind of had a reputation already as being extremely intelligent, extremely capable, extremely well organized, which even opponents and enemies in later years commented on this. Um, there was during World War II, there was an OSS, the precursor of the CIA, the first American foreign intelligence service.
Hmm.
And during the war, the OSS, of course, sent agents throughout Europe to make contact with the underground partisan resistance movements. And one of them, who's stationed in Albania, filed a report. And his report talked about the character of Enver Hoxha. And he said, and they said something along the lines of, Enver Hoxha is quite a character. Looks like a film star. No, looks like a matinee idol. Looks like a matinee idol. Imagine a heavier Rudolfo Valentino. um, uh, uh, Quotes 19th century French poetry. Wait a minute. No, looks like a heavier Rodolfo Valentino. Hates the British, doesn't have much use for Americans, but loves Joe Stalin.
Ah.
He'll quote 19th century French poetry at you 1 minute and then go kill Nazis the next.
That's the man.
and even later, bourgeois historians, probably one of the best histories of socialist Albania ever written, and they're very few. It's a sparse field, but this one is really good. It's called Socialist Albania since 1944, by a guy named Peter Prifty, Prifti. But in it, he talks about the character of Hoxha, and he comments again, extremely well educated, um, very well versed in history, politics, philosophy, especially the philosophy of education. And then concludes by saying, in fact, Hoxha can be best characterized as holding the lamp of learning in one hand and the sword of the dictatorship of the proletariat in the other.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not a bad character to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that very much. I mean, I could understand why he'd be very, why he likes or loved Joe Stalin so much because, I mean, same. But also, um, he very much. It seems like a lot of the ways that he led the Albanian communist movement through his tenure as the general secretary seems very in line with the way Joseph Stalin, or in the same vein as the way Joe Stalin did the same thing. And it feels almost as though Hoxha, like the both of them have this very humble, I don't know, like disposition about them where they don't want to act as though they're some kind of god. There's this idea amongst bourgeois and liberal scholars that, we need to idolize and deify our leaders. A lot of the ways that Americans do the same thing with like George Washington, for example, he was a perfect man. Like there's so much, I would say, propaganda around that. But as Marxists, we have more of a tendency to see these people as human beings who made mistakes, and were not perfect by any measure. Because when you start deifying your theorists and previous leaders of the movement, you kind of lose the plot in a lot of ways, which is as Marxists we don't want to do. And Hoxha, I think that describing him as a full person, as in the same way that we would describe Marx, Engels, and Stalin, is very important. So, I don't know, what were some things about Hoxha, like in his policy that, we can look back on and say that this was could have been changed or tweaked or perhaps discarded altogether? What were some things that we would critique him on?
The most common thing that you'll hear, and I myself do not necessarily agree with this, but the most common criticism that you'll hear, even among supporters of Hoxha, even among Albanian communists, was the campaign against religion. That's starting in 1967. All the churches and mosques were closed down in Albania, and Albania became the world's first officially socialist state. I'm sorry, socialist, Jesus Christ. Atheist state.
Don't say his
Well,
name in
actually, by that time
vain.
it was. By that time, you could argue that it was that too. But anyway, it was the world's first and only officially atheist state. And in 1976, when a new constitution was drafted, it explicitly said that nationalist, fascist, and religious organizations are outlawed in Albania, and that although the right of individuals to their personal beliefs is respected, the state encourages the promotion of the materialist scientific worldview.
Right.
Now, there's some people who criticize that, saying that it was premature, that it was extreme. I don't necessarily agree. And maybe I'm speaking from the vantage point of someone living in the United States and seeing the horrific results of religious fundamentalism and religious fanaticism in our country.
Right.
So I don't necessarily disagree with that, but some people will cite that. Where I do think that Hoxha where I do think that Hoxha was in error is he characterized the Cuban intervention in Angola
Mm,
as being a Soviet ploy, a part of a Soviet ploy, that the Cubans were acting as Soviet cat's paws in Africa.
right.
We now know that's not true. And as a matter of fact, we now know that the Soviets were totally opposed to the Cuban intervention in Angola. And we now know that the Cuban intervention in Angola led to the independence of Namibia and the defeat, eventually the political defeat of apartheid South Africa a few years later.
Mm,
Also, Hoxha condemned the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and
absolutely.
supported the Mujahideen. Well, today we know who that Mujahideen was.
Right.
That led to the Taliban, that led to Osama bin Laden, that led to Al Qaeda. So he was wrong,
Right.
but he was writing in 1977, 78.
Yes, this was
So
before.
yeah, so he was operating on the information that was just available to him and to the general public at the time, not what we now know after the release of Soviet archives was the case.
Yeah.
So, so even though I'll say he was mistaken, I'm tempted to give him a pass.
Yeah, it's almost like
Honest mistakes, and hey, 98 out of 100 is still a good track.
yeah, that's not a bad that's I mean, and it also it makes me think of, when people criticize the Soviet Union and Stalin more specifically for being the first state to recognize Israel. Well, off of what they were seeing at the time, they were under the impression that Israel was going to be a socialist project
Yeah,
first.
and
Um,
a major blow to British imperialism.
It was later found that this was not the case, and so they stopped supporting the project of Israel, on principle that we as Marxists do not support ethno supremacy, and the suppression of people of any stripes. We just do not support that. But at the time, there was a, like, obviously there was the impression that this was not the case. When we find out more information, we can adjust accordingly. There's this, there's this broad critique of Marxism, I would say, or I guess specific Marxist actions, or actions made by Marxist leaders, where it's like, well, they did this, and it's like, okay, they were operating with the information they had at the time. Do I support everything that they did? No. But people are not a monolith. You have to look at them as whole people making decisions off of not only um, factual basis, but also emotional and environmental. There's a lot of different factors that are adding into this larger phenomena. And we're trying to get to what exactly is the core of the situation. And at the time, the Soviets did not realize what Israel actually was, as like an ethno supremacist project. They had no idea. Um, Obviously, they readjusted when they realized what it actually was. And I would say probably, I would argue that Hoxha would be in the same boat in regards to the Mujahideen.
Mhm.
Um, and so like, and I would like to comment on the religion aspect of this. I don't necessarily disagree with that premise either of abolishing religious institutions, especially when you look at the fact that religious institutions, I mean, I talked about this in my Jesus was a Socialist episode. There's been a lot of discourse around that. I know everyone's mad at me for that title. It's fine. Like, I get it. I know it was meant to be inflammatory. But anyway, I would say that I said in this episode that there has been a large pushback against the church, rightfully so, because it has become very much a bourgeois institution. Um, and this is not to say that people cannot or should not practice religion. This is not something that you can escape. People are going to practice religion whether we like it or not. Um, it I think is in the best interest of people in general to not have religion mixed up in the state. And I know a lot of Americans would say, well, this is ingrained in our Constitution, but it's not practiced because the Senate still, um, like, what do they do before the, like, the Senate is still like what? Um, Not praying. What am I saying? Why is this escaping me now? I know I should know this. I'm an American. Um, Basically God is still very like under God, like
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
idea that we are one nation under God. Why is that? Like, why does that exist in our oh, I went to public school for 12 years. I should know what this is. I feel so embarrassed. um
One nation under God, and God we trust.
In
Those
God
things
we
were added in.
trust.
Those things were added in the 50s.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
That's meant that was meant to have an anti-communist thrust to it.
which is not surprising considering how reactionary the United States is. But I would say that I don't necessarily disagree. Also, I concur with you living under the current horrors of like Christian fundamentalism. I was actually out to lunch with a friend of mine who's an ex-Mormon. They were raised in the Mormon church and are still close with their Mormon family. I would say at a distance, but still very like, in contact. And there was a recent shooting at a Mormon church in Michigan. Um, and they kind of explained to me this relationship that Mormons have with fundamental Christians who look down on Mormons as the devil, which is the justification that this shooter used, this MAGA, I should say, this MAGA aligned shooter used to go and kill a bunch of Mormon people.
Yeah.
Um,
What a lot of the fundies don't get um, is that separation of church and state is to protect them
mhm,
from each other,
mhm,
protect
absolutely.
them from other Christians. It was not atheists who were burning heretics. It wasn't agnostics who were hanging witches.
Yep. And it's I think that, I have a lot of very fundamental religious family who I love them very much at a distance. And a lot of them, they like to spout off a lot of MAGA talking points about communism, of course, but also about religion. And I have to hold my tongue a little bit when I talk about, like the violence that is currently that is occurring in our country right now, because I would say a large part of it is doled out from Christian fundamentalists who want to do harm to American people. The idea that, and I talked about this with my partner Roman on the Jesus was a Socialist episode, where, you can ascribe to religious beliefs, but when those beliefs get to a point in which you want to do harm against other people, you no longer have a right to like, it's not that you don't have a right to practice those beliefs, it's that you don't have a right to make that as your excuse as to why you are allowed to do harm against other people, which is why I don't really disagree with Albania's policy under Hoxha around religion, because we are currently living in an era in which mass gun violence is an everyday occurrence, largely done by right-wing shooters who ascribe to the MAGA movement, which it's called itself fundamentalist Christian. If you're going to call yourself that, then you have to be ready for the smoke that you get for the people that dole out harm in that name.
Yeah. And actually, now that you mentioned guns, another aspect of socialist Albania was it was armed to the teeth.
Hmm.
Everyone was expected to undergo military training as part of their high school education, I believe. Everyone was expected to keep their military weapons, keep them at home,
Hmm.
to form part of a people's militia, and yet you never saw any gun violence.
Yeah. And this is, this is a little controversial, definitely amongst liberals in America, because about gun reform. And I don't necessarily disagree with certain aspects of gun reform. But I think that we're kind of ignoring a larger problem here, which is that the culture and the attitude that we have, I guess not the attitude, but I don't know, what we have created here in the United States is a culture of violence. We can see the violence done against, for example, Native people when the Europeans landed on this continent, slavery, all of these things that our country was founded on that have never really been addressed. It's just kind of existed. And we expect people to just be okay with this, first of all. But then in addition to that, I think it's interesting that the violence is not being done by the people who were colonized. The violence is being done by the colonizers.
Yes. Yes.
And I can say that as someone who is Puerto Rican. I do have to put that out there. I am the descendant of colonized people. I am very white
Boricua.
passing.
Eres
Yes.
Boricua. Nunca supe. Nunca supe.
But I mean,
Boricua.
you're just
Mi
clowning
hermana
on me
Boricua.
now. You're
Mi
clowning
prima
on me.
Boricua.
This is the chair of the APL, everyone. He's doing a hate crime against me.
No,
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 no.
no. You're a friendly Cuban.
Yes.
Yes, but I would say like there's so much like white guilt in addition to like colonization,
Mm-hmm.
but also
Yeah.
absolutely no actual accountability for it. I'm not saying that white people should feel guilty forever and ever around colonization. I'm saying that if we really want to see true reform and change, then we need to change the very foundation of this country. Um, and I think that the people of Albania did that very well. Not that they were colonized necessarily, but I
No,
don't.
no, no. But one other aspect of the whole gun question within the context of Albania, and it is true, the average Albanian citizen was armed to the teeth. So if Hoxha and the communist regime were so horrific, why weren't they overthrown?
That's exactly.
Could have been easily overthrown.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, and I forget in what venue he said this, but Enver gave a speech one time where he said um, to the public, to his constituents, to whoever he was speaking to, and again, I'm kicking myself. I can't recall exactly what was the context of this speech, but he said, if we ever betray you, if your party ever turns against you, overthrow us, kill
Yep.
us.
Yep. And I would say any good communist leader would say that.
Yeah.
If we betray the trust of the working people, you should overthrow us. And I'm not talking to the Trotskyites here. I'm not talking to y'all. um, I've been learning about the Moscow trials in depth, and it's been a lot. But like I think that like Enver saying that is in essence like what most revisionist historians and liberals are missing. They wanna say he was such a dictator. He killed a million billion people. Blah 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 blah. This is the narrative with so many communist leaders. And I have to say that when it comes to Hoxha and him specifically saying that to the Albanian people, that is what I think most like anti-revisionist communist leaders would say. Which is like, yeah, don't put up with the bullshit, basically. Like, if we do something bad, then you should revolt. We like one thing that I would like critique Stalin on, for example, but I wouldn't overthrow him over, was repealing abortion post-war because they needed to pump those numbers up. I would.
There's more to it than that, and maybe we can have come back and talk about that in more detail. But there was much more to it than that. You commonly hear that, but actually, abortion was not made illegal, but it was limited in certain ways. For example, let me explain.
Hmm.
So The initiative came from women party members. It was a top-down, I'm sorry, a bottom-up initiative to deal with the problem of essentially deadbeat dads and fathers not wanting to take responsibility for the life that they've created and instead pressuring their wives and girlfriends and significant others to have abortions. And the way the law was written, if you look at what the penalties were, it's very revealing. So for a doctor, let me see, get it in the right order. So from worst to worst, the most severe penalties with prison time was for a man who compelled a woman to have an abortion against her will. The next penalty was for a doctor who performed an abortion outside of a hospital setting. It also included some prison time. And the very lowest rung, a woman who had an abortion. What was their penalty? Social reprimand.
Social reprimand, I see.
Yes. Don't do that.
No.
Yeah, no, essentially, that's what it is, a social reprimand. And I believe also like a 30 ruble fine.
Right. Yeah. And like, I think that, I don't necessarily, I still don't fully agree.
Of course not.
Mainly on the basis that, I have a uterus and I don't think abortion should ever be outlawed in any, I think that I would say that my analysis on that specific policy is it is more reactionary than I would like. Specifically because if we're going to penalize abortions for deadbeat dads, we're not actually getting to the root of the problem, which is deadbeat dads.
Right.
And that is also, I don't think, can necessarily be fixed with policy, but it is also cultural and looking at like, what are the environmental factors that are causing dads to walk out, or on the flip side, causing them to pressure women to get abortions, which is why I would still oppose it, but I can understand the context and I can somewhat I can agree with the penalty of a doctor not performing an abortion in a hospital, because that does pose a lot of health risks. But that's where I would stand on it. But it's this kind of discourse that's very important for understanding and moving forward with policy under a communist society, because we need to be looking at all aspects of these things and truly understanding what is the outcome of this? What are the possible outcomes? Why do we need to be so aware of them? And this is, I think, like very much what Hoxha and Stalin were upholding, which is dialectical materialism. What are the material circumstances in which this is arising? What should we be aware of? What should we be weary of? And as it relates to, again, Hoxha's religious policy, part of the reason I largely agree is because of the time I am living in currently, which is a lot of religious violence. And I don't know where I was going with this. I just completely lost my train of thought.
Well, I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and no one would support such a policy today.
No.
But we have to look at things contextually.
Yep, as they were.
And yeah, as they were. And the point is to understand why things happened, not necessarily just to condemn. It's very easy to condemn, a lot harder to understand. Now, I'm not an expert on medical history, but one has to also take into account, so what was the condition of Soviet medicine? What was the status of Soviet medicine and medical science in the 1930s? Especially in small towns and small villages across that huge landmass. I remember reading, and I don't have an exact quote on this, and I'm doing it totally from memory, that before the 1960s or 50s, um, an abortion, even if conducted under what would have been the safest medical conditions of the time, would have been a 50-50 chance of ending with the life of the mother,
Mhm.
of ending up killing the mother as well.
I see.
So again, I'm not an expert, but the point is everything has to be seen in context.
Yes,
And even
absolutely.
if we disagree with a policy and would never support such a policy, we have to try to understand, well, why did they do this? It wasn't because they're evil.
No.
It's not because they're the bad guys. That's an easy out. Why did this policy occur?
Yeah, and I implore listeners to, make the same judgments about Hoxha and his legacy and his rule in Albania, or not rule necessarily, but him in the seat of the general secretary for better part of 40 years, from what I can
Mhm.
from what I can see. We don't have to like everything that Hoxha did. We don't have to agree with everything that Hoxha did, but we do, if you are a committed Marxist, or even not, have to look at the full scale of everything, all of the environmental, material factors and historical factors that were causing these policies to happen, and try to understand to our fullest extent and through discourse, what made them, what made it possibly a good policy, what made it a not so good policy, what were the effect on people's lives, the actual tangible effects. And this is what makes for a much more rounded understanding of these people as leaders, but also as human beings. Um, and it's why, I wanted to talk about him today, because it's like, Hoxha at his core was an organizer. Um, and as I learn more about him, and as I learn more about most communist leaders, I have to give them credit for, um, at least doing things in earnest. At least they were working. I mean, when you look at like the Soviet Union and its founding, it had nothing else to base itself off of. It was working from complete scratch.
Yes.
While Albania was not necessarily the same thing, Albania, as you stated prior, was working in an environment in which it had enemies on all sides. Um, and so this is why I think that understanding Hoxha, not only as a leader, but as a person, as a husband, as a father, and as a communist, is so important to understanding not only why we uphold him, but why we critique him.
One of the things that I think is really outstanding uh, about socialist Albania and Hoxha's administration was criticism and self-criticism, but especially criticism of government policy and government officials, was not only encouraged, but it was considered a duty.
Hmm.
And every town and every village had public bulletin boards where anyone who had a grievance with a party official, with a factory manager, could post it for the public to see. And it was expected that any official who was publicly criticized had X amount of time, like 48 hours, 72 hours, to publicly respond to the criticism.
Oh.
And Hoxha himself famously said, a country where someone is afraid to criticize the government is not a socialist country.
Period. Yeah. No, that's I think that's a great way to end it. Is like, if we cannot have, I would say, civil uh discourse and disagreement and conversation, if we cannot do this, then we are not upholding the values of socialism. Um, it's We currently live in a country where this is not possible. Obviously, we're not a socialist country, where this is a capitalist country here in the United States. Um, but not only do we live in a country in which you cannot openly disagree, but you will be punished for disagreeing. I'm doing an episode on this in a few weeks, but
Mm.
the designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization,
Uh,
which is so interesting considering that Antifa is not a centralized um, organization itself. It's very much just like it's a very grassroots thing. I don't know how you're going to, I don't know the logistics of this, and I don't think that the Trump administration does either. Um, it's very much a reaction to current events that are happening. But we live in a country right now where even when a Democrat is in office, criticism is largely not allowed. Because if you're seen as criticizing the fascists, aka the Republican Party, then you're at risk for actual harm coming to yourself or your family. And if you're seen as criticizing the Democrats, you're seen as criticizing the party of the group, the lesser of two evils. And you're wrong for doing that because, well, how could you? They're just trying to, they're the best that we have, and we're kind of in this weird stun lock where it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And it's why we need to really put a wedge in this cycle of fascism and end it through a communist revolution. Because if we are not allowed to have public discourse, we have nothing.
When Enver was on his deathbed in his final days, the doctors spoke to his wife, Nejmia, and said, he needs absolute total repose, total rest, no stress, absolutely no work. Keep official documents away from him, letters, no, total repose. When Enver found out about this, he blew a fuse and went right through the roof. And he insisted that all the mail that people had written him be immediately sent to him over to the hospital, because he prided himself on being totally open to the people, and that the people always have access to him. And he personally, with his own hands, answered every single letter that was sent to him by the Albanian people.
And you know who else
And
did that?
He did that until the day he died.
Yeah, and that's something that his best buddy Joseph Stalin also did. That is a practice that Stalin had, and it's a practice that we should continue to uphold, of direct conversation with our leaders. Even when Joe Biden was in office, there was no way that myself or any other American citizen could send a letter to Joe Biden, because he probably couldn't read it anyway. There's no way that we could send a letter to Joe Biden saying, hey, I have no health care and I'm also really poor, and get a response from him. At the most, you would probably get a response from the White House saying, oh, that really sucks. Sorry. Too bad.
This has been a hallmark of revolutionary leadership, genuine revolutionary leadership, going all the way back to the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a grad student, I was doing primary research on the French Revolution, and I was going to the University of Illinois at Chicago, and there is a library. Oh my God, now I can't remember the name of the library. I want to say the Newberry Library. Well, I could be wrong, but in any case, has a fantastic collection of French Revolution documents. So I went to check it out, just to sift through those documents, see if there's anything that would be of interest to my research. And I was shocked in a good way what the letters were that people were sending to the Committee of Public Safety during the French Revolution. What were the letters that people were sending to Robespierre and Saint-Just and the French revolutionary leadership? The water main in my neighborhood broke.
What?
The water main in my neighborhood broke and it flooded the streets, and we haven't received a bread in 2 days, and the neighbor's dog got out and pooped in my yard. And that was the level of communication And yeah, we're laughing about it and it's funny, but there's a very serious truth there.
Yeah,
To be genuine revolutionaries, we need to have that direct contact with the people, and that the people
absolutely.
feel free even to complain to us about the neighbor dog pooping in their yard.
Yeah, I mean that's a genuine complaint. I can't I can't diss them for that one. But yeah, I
But
mean
but
that
but again, that level of openness and availability and communication, that is what makes revolutionary leadership.
absolutely, and it's what makes the CIA can put out as much propaganda as they want about these revolutionary leaders, but they can never change history. They can never change the actual facts of the situation, which is that Enver Hoxha was not a dictator. Enver Hoxha did not rule over Albania with an iron fist. Um, Enver Hoxha was um, was a, I would say, all around very good communist. And not that a good communist is necessarily the way that we should grade people, but moreover, he was a good person who absolutely made mistakes, but in his the essence of what he was trying to do was always for the people. It was always about um, it was always about furthering the material conditions of the people. And I think that this is something that we can never allow to go into obscurity, because he was so him and I talk about the same way about Stalin a lot as well. We can never allow the false narratives of these people to take over the actual historical events which took place, which are far from the narratives that are put out by the West. And it's why we have to continue to push for the truth, which is that Hoja was not some one-dimensional Waluigi dictator who was out here like cackling and twirling his mustache and being evil for the sake of it. He was first of all a person, and second, someone who was in earnest trying to further the working class revolution to its fullest potential. And I think
I'll
that
tell you two. Go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I was going to say, well, I'll tell you two stories that illustrate Enver Hoxha, the man, the
Hmm.
individual. Um, and especially for getting ready to wrap up this, the
Yeah.
second one is totally appropriate for the season that we're about to enter into. But the first story is Enver was diabetic,
Ah.
and he had an assigned cook, and when the cook arrived on the job first day, he learned Comrade Enver's diabetic, so we have to make certain meals for him. Certain foods are forbidden, no sugar, control the carbohydrates, blah blah.
Mhm.
And so, in a memoir that he wrote many years later, the cook goes, and I saw that Comrade Enver was put on a very strict diet of no more than 1,500 calories a day, no bread, no this, no that, with the end result that he was always hungry.
Mm.
And because he was always hungry, he was grumpy.
Ah.
And it just will not do to have a grumpy general secretary. So the cook goes, I reached out to Comrade Enver's sister, and I said to her, do you know of any dishes that your mother made for Comrade Enver when you were children that he really loved? Because I'll make him a diabetic version of it,
Hmm.
a diabetic friendly version of it.
Okay.
And so I forget what the dish was, but he made his favorite childhood meal and then presented it. Um, and Enver was just flabbergasted. You did this? You did this? Um, and then Enver composed himself and said, well, anyone could be a good cook, but to be a great cook means to be creative with the ingredients you have at hand.
Okay.
And he did it. You did it. You're a great cook. But then the other one, um, which is totally appropriate, consider today is October 1st, totally appropriate for the season that we're entering into,
Hmm.
is after Enver died, and after the overthrow of socialism in Albania, Enver's private library was confiscated. And when people later examined what were the books in his private library, and it was an extensive library, like 20,000 volumes, um, it was noted that the books kind of fell into three categories. First category, books on history, philosophy, political economy, political science. Category one. Books on classic literature, and sometimes even autographed copies, like from people like Jean-Paul Sartre.
Ah.
Yeah. And then the person who was commenting says that the third category was the truly interesting one. Horror stories and murder mysteries. He had a vast library of vampire stories.
Was he an Agatha Christie fan?
And he was an Agatha Christie fan.
No
vampire
way!
stories and Agatha Christie murder mysteries. Yes.
My grandma loves Agatha Christie, but she would not like Enver Hoxha, so that's really funny. Well, I think that's a great great way to leave this off, being that it is October 1st, on day of recording, and we will be releasing this episode probably in a few weeks, when I will either be doing my second round of labor talks or out of the country in Spain. So, thank you so much, Comrade Camilo, for coming in today and talking about a little bit about Enver Hoxha. We definitely didn't hit on every single part of his legacy, but if you're interested, for listeners, I would certainly seek out autobiographies about the man. Don't just Google him, because you will get a bunch of bullshit. It actually takes a little bit of work, but Marxist.org is also a good place to start for his written works. One
of the things that we did not talk about was his own writings. And so if anyone wants to really learn what was Hoxha all about, what was he thinking, what was his attitude on different things, go to the man himself. He wrote a series of books, Reflections on China, 2 volumes, about his experiences working with and then being both inspired by and then extremely disappointed in the Chinese leadership. The Titoites, about relations with Yugoslavia. The Khrushchevites, about the eventual rupture with the Soviet Union. He wrote extensively, and no better source of information about the man than from the pen of the mouth himself. And if people are looking for secondary sources, overviews, histories, absolutely the best thing. There are a few things, but the one that really stands out, even though it's a little dated because it came out in the early 80s, but it's the best thing out there. I highly recommend it. Socialist Albania Since 1944 by Peter Prifty.
All right.
It's a bourgeois account, but it's an honest bourgeois account.
Well, I can accept an honest account. I can whether it's a bourgeois or not, I can accept an honest one. So I think that's perfect. Thank you so much. And
My pleasure.
yeah, perfect.